Episode 68. 3 Rental Rooms Horror Stories. Jerry, who had a shoestring budget, was about to enter college and had a tough time finding an affordable accommodation. But after a week of riding his motorbike and searching, he finally found a newly built stretch of rental rooms on a plot of land. The rooms were small, but since the price was affordable, Jerry decided to stay in one of the rooms. Over the next few days, he saw other college students moving in as well. The first week was peaceful, but things took a sudden turn for the worst in the following week as a couple of students who stayed in the rooms turned sick. Soon, more students got sick, including Jerry. One evening, Jerry then spoke to his neighbor named Jared. "Hey, Jared, I'm not sure if there's some virus spreading around. All of us living here are sick and my doctor's medicines don't seem to work." Jared then said, "Yeah, I went to the doctor yesterday too, but I'm not feeling any better." Jerry then went back to his room to rest for the night. However, the following morning, Jerry was woken up by loud knocks on his door. Jerry opened the door and saw that it was another one of his neighbors, named Harry. Jerry then said, "What's up, man?" A sick-looking Harry then said, "Jared passed away in his sleep, man." The ambulance had already taken him away. Jerry was speechless. He just froze. It took a while before Jerry could gather his thoughts. Jerry knew that something wasn't right, especially since the doctors couldn't figure out why any of the students living there was sick. Jerry called his dad and told him about everything that was going on at the rental rooms. Jerry's dad told Jerry to hang in there and he would call him back later. Soon enough, Jerry's dad called. Jerry answered the phone and his dad said, "Hey, Jer, you need to come back home immediately. I'll explain everything later." Jerry got dressed and took a taxi back to his parents' place, which was about a 2-hour drive away. Once there, Jerry's parents hugged him and sat him down in the living room. Jerry noticed that his Uncle Steve was there too. Uncle Steve then said, "Okay, Jer, we have done our own prayers. There's definitely some negative supernatural practices going on with the place you're renting." Jerry then said, "What do you mean, Uncle Steve?" Uncle Steve then replied, "The owner made a deal with the devil, Jer, so for him to be rich, he is sacrificing the lives of his tenants." It made sense to Jerry from that point on. He now knew why the students living there were getting ill, and Jared even died in his sleep. Uncle Steve then advised Jerry to move out of the place as soon as he could. Jerry went back to his rental room, collected his stuff, and came back to his parents' home. Together with Uncle Steve, the family carried out some prayer rituals to keep Jerry protected. Over the coming days, Jerry fortunately regained his health. Unfortunately, some of the remaining tenants passed away in their sleep too before the surviving tenants moved out. All the doctors could say was that the students died from a heart attack. Jerry found that hard to believe. Heart attack? Every single one of them? Caleb had found a new job in the city, and as rent was expensive, he searched for the cheaper alternatives. So, after looking through the online ads, Caleb eventually found a quiet but rundown room for rent. The room was the second to last unit in a row of rental rooms. Once at the doorstep, Caleb noticed that the last unit's lights were on, so he assumed that there was someone living there, and after a quick look at the room, Caleb decided to rent the room. That same night, Caleb moved in, unpacked his belongings, and eventually went to sleep. For the next few days, Caleb did see other neighbors from afar entering or leaving the area, but for the unit at the end, Caleb only heard his neighbor going in and out of the unit while Caleb was in his room. Oddly, he had never gotten the chance to see that particular neighbor. A week went by and Caleb still hasn't seen his neighbor at the end, and one night, Caleb was about to go to bed when he heard his neighbor humming. It sounded like a young lady. who seemed to have just returned home, and went to her room. Soon after, it sounded as though she exited the room while still humming. Still curious about his neighbor, Caleb got up and looked out of the room. Into the distance, Caleb could see a lady enter one of the two shared washrooms. Caleb thought to himself, "Is that my neighbor? Let's find out." So Caleb walked towards the shared washroom area and pretended to use the other cubicle, which was facing the one the lady went into earlier. Caleb just sat and waited in his cubicle before he suddenly heard a lady's voice giggling in the other washroom. As he was listening intently, Caleb could hear two guys walking towards the washroom area and having a conversation. He then heard one of the guys saying to the other that he's going to use the other cubicle, while he told his friend to wait for the cubicle that Caleb was in. Caleb then thought to himself, "That's weird. How could one of the guys use the other cubicle when the lady's still in there?" While Caleb was still deep in his thoughts, he was surprised when one of the guys suddenly knocked on Caleb's door and said, "Hey, hurry up in there. I need to use the washroom." Caleb then pretended to clean himself up and walked out of the washroom. It was a young man. Caleb then said, "Hey, what's up, man?" "Hey, man, haven't seen you here before. Are you new here?" asked the man. Caleb then said, "Yeah, I'm Caleb. I just moved in last week." "Yeah, nice meeting you, man. I'm Anthony, and I live in the second unit with my roommate. He's in that other cubicle," said Anthony. Caleb then said, "Speaking of which, I swear a lady was inside the cubicle right before you guys came here." Anthony then said, "There's no lady here, man. It's all guys here." "Wait, what about the unit at the end? I swear I heard a lady walking and humming earlier," asked Caleb. Anthony then said, "There was a lady previously, but from what I heard, she was murdered by her boyfriend there, and no one has stayed there since." Caleb was shocked. He was sure he heard the lady earlier, and Caleb was sure he saw a lady walking into the washroom. Lucky for Caleb, that was the only time he saw the lady. But the occasional humming was something Caleb continued to hear and get used to. Sort of. Gary, his wife Amanda, and their baby boy George had recently moved into a rental room near Gary's workplace. Amanda liked the place as it was affordable and they had a personal washroom instead of a shared washroom like their previous place. The only drawback was the shared kitchen area located at the front of the stretch of rental rooms, while their room was right at the other end. It was a hassle to get food, but one night, as Gary was hungry, he wanted to go to the kitchen area. When he was about to exit the room, Amanda said, "It's okay, hon. I'll heat up the food for you. I thought of heating up some food for myself, too." "Okay, thanks, dear, but it's late, so I'll just accompany you to the kitchen area. And George is asleep anyway. It'll be quick, so he'll be fine on his own for a while," said Gary. Once at the kitchen area, Gary realized that he wanted to collect the spare room key from the front counter. So Gary left Amanda on her own for a while and went further front towards the counter. Gary collected the keys and came back to the kitchen area, but noticed that Amanda wasn't there anymore. Thinking that she had probably gone back into the room, Gary walked back to the room as well. Once back in the room, Gary noticed that George was still sound asleep and heard the washroom water tap turned on with the door ajar. Gary wondered to himself, "Where's the food, though? If she's done heating it up, wouldn't she have brought the food into the room?" Gary then knocked on the washroom door and said, "Hey, hun, where's the food?" The voice from inside the washroom then replied, "Yeah, in a while." As the door was ajar, Gary pushed it slightly to confirm it was indeed Amanda. Gary then partially saw Amanda washing her hands in the sink. Now, Gary was sure it was Amanda in the washroom. But Gary was hungry, so he decided to go back to the kitchen area to search for the food, thinking that Amanda had probably left it in the microwave to heat it up and had gone back to the room for a while waiting for the food to heat up. So Gary went back to the kitchen again. That was when he was shocked to see Amanda taking out the food from the microwave. Gary then said, "Well, hon, I thought you went back to the room." Amanda looked at Gary and replied, "Why would I? I can't just leave the food while I'm still heating it up." Gary then said, "After I came back from the front counter to collect the keys earlier, I didn't see you." "Oh, I went to the storage room right behind here to grab some food containers to pack our lunch for tomorrow," said Amanda. "So you never once went back to the room?" asked Gary. Amanda said, "No, dear, I was either just here or at the back." Gary needed to find out. He went back to the room, and, as expected, there wasn't anyone else there except for George, who was still sound asleep. Gary checked the washroom sink, and it was completely dry, as though no one had used it. Gary was confused. He was sure that he saw Amanda in the washroom. Or was it really his wife that he saw earlier?